UK? Muslim lawyer for ISIS bride asks his followers to flood radio shows' phone lines to avoid hard questions. Hi everyone. Some assistance is needed tonight, with everyone needed to call LBC, and to keep the phone lines jammed. Keeping the far right from calling in and keeping the calls in favor of Shamima Begum. This is to be kept in private chats and groups. Please do not put this on social media because it will alert the far right. This is the message from Mohammed Akunjee. Salam Naz. I am going to be on LBC radio tonight at 10 on the Tom Swarbrick show discussing Shamima Begum. It's going to get ugly on the phone in. Could you get as many people to phone in as possible with questions for me regarding her return and supporting the idea that she should be returned to the UK? LBC's Tom Swarbrick show is a popular radio show in the UK. A Muslim lawyer named Mohammed Akunjee was asked to appear on it last year in order to talk about his defense of ISIS bride Shamima Begum. In addition to being the family lawyer for the ISIS terrorist bride, Mr. Akunjee was also the lawyer for one of Lee Rigby's killers. And he is currently the lawyer for the Syrian refugee Jamal, the schoolboy who was pushed to the ground and had some water poured in his mouth in an incident that lasted 10 seconds at most. But because Jamal is Muslim, this water incident has been escalated to the magnitude of an event akin to waterboarding at Gitmo. Akunjee was aware that listeners would be calling in to question him during his time on the show, and he expected that he would be asked to defend his stance in relation to taking Begum on as a client, and why he thought she should be allowed back into the UK. On air, Akunjee stated to one caller that as a lawyer, he has a duty to defend all people, and that if he didn't, then democracy would cease to function. He went so far as to send private messages to his newfound, hard-left gang of Antifa supporters, telling them that it was imperative that they spread the word of the time and date of his phone-in segment on LBC. He didn't want any right-wing people calling in and questioning his ethics, you see. He didn't want a counter-narrative going out other than the one he was putting forward. It was his desire that the phone calls should only be of supportive voices who agreed with his stance, and who also felt sympathy for the ISIS bride. To this end, he wanted his Twitter mates to flood the phone lines in order to silence any dissenting voices. This is simply Sharia through the back door. If you can't silence people using the law, then do your utmost to ensure they have no way of having a say using any other means at your disposal, and it is most definitely not democratic, that thing he claims to be such a big fan of. Akunjee's tactics are reminiscent of Nazism and fascism. Nazis aren't simply known for killing Jews, homosexuals, and others, they are also known for attempting to control the public discourse, and to silence any and all critics. Think brown shirts and book burnings and storming lecture halls. Today's left-wing tactics simply tarted up and committed in the name of social justice.
It is now 4:03. I want to take you to another story that will again be developing through this coming week. It is the latest twist in the Shamima Begum story. It's going to hit the news this week. Prepare yourselves. I have to say, this is a story that genuinely sends me lurching from one corner of the argument to the other. This week, the 23-year-old Shamima Begum will find out if she has won her appeal against being stripped of her British citizenship. Miss Begum was 15 when she travelled from Bethnal Green, East London, through Turkey and into territory controlled by so-called Islamic State, IS, with two schoolgirls. They were both her best friends. That was back in 2015. You'll remember those other two friends of her, it's thought that they were both killed in bombing of Raqqa by Allied forces. Now, Shamima Begum's British citizenship was revoked on national security grounds shortly after she was found 9 months pregnant in a Syrian refugee camp in February 2019. Since then, she has been locked in an ongoing legal battle with the government ever since an attempt to get her citizenship restored failed, you'll remember, at the Supreme Court. Now, the latest stage of the challenge involves the Home Office at the Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal, is the special tribunal that's going to be deciding this week. Such a complicated story. My question to you this hour, do you think Shamima Begum should have her citizenship restored? Do you think she should be allowed back into the UK? Call. As I said at the beginning, I vacillate wildly on this story. On one hand, I am absolutely furious that somebody who is a British citizen, a British teenager, a 15-year-old, travelled to join a death cult whose evil had been widely reported at the time. You would have had to be living under a rock not to know what ISIS were doing and what they were about. And when I think about this, my feelings run into, I don't care how bored she was, I don't care that she wasn't allowed to stay out late with her friends and she was fed up with her parents, I don't care that she wasn't necessarily doing particularly well at school, I don't care that she struggled to make friends. All of that, according to journalists that have interviewed her. And then I pull myself back and I realise that sometimes your intellect just has to trump your emotions. Because the fact of the matter is, we now know so much more about online grooming. It's entirely possible, isn't it, that a 15-year-old teenager, British, living in East London, became the victim of online grooming, that perhaps she didn't fully understand, that when she went on the thing that she thought was going to be an adventure that got her out of home was actually her entering a death cult. And perhaps she thought, it's bad not being able to go out with my friends late at night with my parents. Did she fully understand that when she then went to Raqqa, she was going to have absolutely no rights whatsoever? Instead, she was going to marry a jihadist, self-styled jihadist ISIS fighter. Very hard to know. My question to you this hour, can we unpick this? Do you think Shamima Begum should have her citizenship restored and allowed back into the UK? As I say, the Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal is going to make that decision this week on Wednesday. It is going to be a huge story. Tasneem Akunjee is criminal defence lawyer specialising in terrorism law. She represented Shamima Begum's family. Hello. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Oh, hello.
Sorry. Tasneem, yes. I apologise.
Bit of gendering.
Yes. May I ask you, such a difficult story. How much more do you think we know now about online grooming and how it works, the mechanics of that? How much have we learnt since 2015?
Well, I mean, much has been made from the prevent strategy, and that's the government's sort of strategy on how to combat extremism and terrorism. There's been many companies who have been employed by the government in terms of investigating this. There are professors in King's and Exeter University who've made a career out of examining precisely that question. And so we do know a lot more. But importantly, we actually did know quite a lot back in 2015. I think you may recall that David Cameron launched a website called Educate Against Hate, which was to give the tools needed to parents and teachers to recognise the signs of online grooming among students and children. But that all came a bit too late. It all came for Shamima Begum and her cohort, because it came after they'd left, about hot on the heels of their departure.
Can you help me just unpick some of this, what from the outside anyway, as an onlooker, feels like quite a complicated set of appeals against the decision taken by the Home Secretary, the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, to remove her passport. The last time I looked at this story, the Supreme Court had decided that the Home Secretary was right, I thought. What is this Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal, and why is it that it appears that it may or may not rule differently to the Supreme Court?
Well, all these type of cases where somebody is having their citizenship stripped starts and ends in the Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal. what happens through that process is, whilst this tribunal's going on, interim, effectively, decisions are made about aspects of the case. Now, one side or the other may feel that the court may have got it wrong on that particular plank of the journey, and then go off to the Court of Appeal or judicial review, and ultimately up to the Supreme Court to have that element of that plank decided once and for all. Once that decision is made by the Supreme Court, it comes back to the Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal, right, and that then carries on the process, having absorbed what the Supreme Court has said about those elements of the matter. So there is one element left, which is being decided, that was heard in November, and that is to do with the issue of human trafficking, and whether or not the Home Secretary had properly considered that aspect of things when he made that decision.
So is this the last part of her recourse to law?
It's not the last cast of recourse to law. It's the final plank of what has been asked of the the Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal to consider. Now, whatever the decision is, no one can view that or see that before it's made, and the reasoning behind it. Then one side or the other may think that they have a right to appeal that decision also. So it may not be the end of the journey, but it certainly is coming to the end of approaching the end of the tunnel on this issue.
So I remember reading a quote from Sajid Javid, and it went, I'm paraphrasing now. He said, was the effect of, if the public could see what I had seen in terms of the evidence against Shamima Begum, they would unquestioningly agree that her passport should be withdrawn. Do you have any idea what evidence he was talking about?
No, I don't. I mean, the Special Immigration Appeals Tribunal has two parts to it. One is enclosed evidence, as in hearings that happen behind closed doors, and the solicitors and the applicant herself, Shamima, we will never know and not know what the vast majority of that evidence is. And it's important to note that that is an important part of this process, because a lot of that information will come from the security services, and they need to maintain their anonymity. The other part is in the open evidence, and that's what we do know about. Sajid Javid, when he made his decision, had view of all elements of these things, but I will remind people that Sajid Javid also had view of various parties that were going on within the home, within Parliament at the time, and didn't disclose that to anybody. So in terms of what he knew and what he's telling us to believe him about, Sajid Javid may not be the best person for his credibility to be the plank which everyone relies on.
Sajid Javid is obviously not here to defend himself, and of course he would say that he would defend the veracity of the statements that he has made, which pertain to national security of this country. May I ask you something? We often get texts in, and they're already coming in, and I wonder what you make of them. They, broadly speaking, put this argument forward, which is that the reason the government has taken a harder line against Shamima Begum, including Sajid Javid, who is himself of Muslim descent, is because she is a brown Briton as opposed to being a white Briton. Do you think that race has had any part to play in the stripping of her citizenship?
Well, I think the most important part of when this decision was made was it was made at the foothills of a leadership bid by Sajid Javid to become leader of the Conservative Party. And it's my view that played the biggest role in the decisions that were made, because it was certainly leveraged by him as part of his play for...
Well, I mean, if he was here, he would say the timing was such that the two things coincided. But back to the question of race, and we have a lot of text coming in basically with this suggestion that had Shamima Begum been a white teenager, the state would not have acted in such a way. Do you think that holds any water at all?
I think that the issue of race and gender interplay, and I don't think it can be denied that it doesn't. In terms of women of colour generally in politics or in the media, they get a lot more abuse and a lot more negative matters thrown at them than male or white male colleagues. And I would say that's something that's a problem in our culture and society, and Shamima Begum is an unfortunate recipient of that problem as well.
Tasneem Akunjee, thank you very much indeed for joining me this afternoon. Criminal defence lawyer specialising in terrorism law who represented Shamima Begum's family.
We crossed the border. It was just a big field of nothing, and there were like men wearing all black with their faces covered, with guns on their arms. And it was just a bit surreal, you know, seeing it in person. I mean, at that time it was kind of exciting. It was kind of exciting, yeah. It was different. She said she did not think of them as dangerous terrorists, adding, "No. I thought they're here to protect me. They have these guns to protect me and to protect women like me. So I did not think in my wildest dreams that they would hurt me." She also said she never changed her mind about joining ISIS, even after being handed a phone to watch gruesome execution videos. Previous reports have alleged that Shamima Begum was a member of the brutal ISIS religious police, where Begum allegedly carried an AK-47 on street patrols, and she had also sewed suicide bombers into their explosive vests. However, it was also revealed that Shamima lived for 7 months with a mysterious Egyptian man who allegedly supplied ISIS with weapons. Filmmaker Josh Baker reminds her the sick videos were not only big news at the time but were all over YouTube and Twitter. Begum blusters, but they were constantly being taken down and like being deleted, so it was very hard to watch these videos. Note: so Begum has just admitted that she went looking for these atrocity videos to watch, but they were deleted. The fact that she wanted to see these atrocities with her own eyes speaks volumes. Like I was in love with the idea of ISIS. Shamima struggles to stifle a smirk and frequently looks away while being quizzed about her life in ISIS capital Raqqa. In a previous interview with The Times, she admitted she was not fazed by seeing severed heads in bins. She also denies trying to recruit for ISIS, but laughs when asked if she communicated with friends back in London. "I don't want to answer that question," she says. Begum lived for the next 7 months in the house of an older man who was originally from Egypt. And Begum appears extremely uncomfortable being asked about his identity. She gives various answers, at first claiming she can't remember his name, then saying his real name was Saeed. And she adds, "He was really nice to me, like a father figure." Smiling nervously, blinking and shaking her head, she claims she had no idea he was a senior figure in ISIS. However, a neighbor in Raqqa revealed that Saeed was responsible for providing weapons to ISIS. If she was living with him for 7 months, she would have known all the details about his life. It's impossible she didn't know.
The decision by the SIAC court today denying Shamima Begum's appeal is of course incredibly disappointing for her and her family and all those people who expressed support for her right to return home over the years. The court did accept that Shamima Begum was a trafficked person. She was groomed at the age of 15 and trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation from her home in the UK all the way over to Syria. This fact, however, they considered did not displace the Home Secretary's rights given to him by Parliament to strip her of her citizenship. Now, this is something that we ought to think about as a nation. We've sleepwalked ourselves into a scenario where our politicians now have the powers to reach out into our lives and radically change them. At the same time, our courts have very limited powers, it seems, to revisit those decisions and reverse them in a direction which is morally attuned. Now, as a country, we now stand almost exclusively alone in the idea that we don't have to take responsibility for the citizens that travel abroad. Every other nation has revisited their position on that and reversed it. The fact that we stand alone amongst nations where we don't take responsibility for our citizens is something we really ought to think about. And any next government that comes into power, we, the citizenry, should really examine what powers we've given them and whether we're comfortable for them to continue to have those powers when the courts have limited ability to keep them in check. Something to think about.
I want to ask you about Shamima Begum. In 2019, you said stripping her of her British citizenship was the wrong decision. She's lost her appeal to regain it. Should she be allowed to appeal again? Should she be allowed back here in order to face justice in the UK?
I think the court decision yesterday is the right decision. Obviously, the court has looked at all of the information, got all the evidence, not only that was available at the time, but all the evidence that's available since then. National security has to come first.
Okay.
The court's reached its decision. It's looked at all the evidence. I support that decision. And as I say, national security has to come first.